for the Democratic Services. And can I first ask you to turn your mobile phones off? And when you speak first, can you give your name so the people are viewing it, if there is anybody viewing us, will know who's speaking? Thank you very much. Any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillors Treharn, Woodhouse, Taylor, Howard and Dimmock.
Right, thank you. Declarations of interest?
As and when, Chair.
As and when? Yeah. Right. Public open forum? Well, there's quite a few here. Right, there's nothing here. To confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Can somebody who was here? Yes. Number 5 is members' IT issues. Have we got an update on that?
So at the last meeting, we were asked to just log some of the common issues that members were having with their IT issues. So we've done that. You can see ones we've resolved fairly quickly, while some take a bit longer. What the aim was of us doing the list was to show that there isn't one common problem that everybody's having. If there was, it'd be easy to fix. Some of it's not necessarily an issue with the devices. Some of it's not necessarily an issue with the user. It's just all different quirks that members are facing as we're going along. I don't think the list really helps us because it doesn't give us something concrete that we can say, right, this is wrong and we need to fix this. But it's a start. We'll keep developing it as we go along just to see if there are any common themes that do appear. I'm not sure how members fared over Christmas and the New Year with their devices. Well, if they had any issues logging on after Christmas, I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming everything's all right. But if anybody's got any comments they want to make on it, there's the list that we were asked to do after the last meeting.
Thank you, John. Any member? Tudor?
Tudor Thomas, Priory Ward. As far as I'm concerned, it works fairly well. I've got issues which are linked to where I live because I live out in the country. But that has nothing to do with the device. I had minor issues to start with, but all in all, it works reasonably well for me. And I've heard no huge complaint. I know that obviously the ones listed there.
Right. Anybody else want to add to that?
Chair, if I could, I think the reason we've tried to keep this on the agenda is just to make sure that the equipment is working, you're able to access all of the systems and processes you need to. If you are going to engage in remote attendance or remote access, you've got the wherewithal and means to do it. Broadband connectivity at home notwithstanding, because it's very difficult, isn't it, to access if you don't have the bandwidth. But it was just really for us to keep an eye on it. It's new kit, it's new equipment, it's got to work for you. Last time you raised some issues around things like mobile phones, how accessible you would be. And it was just to pick up and just to make sure that we're on top of all your needs and requirements and that you, like us officers, have the tools that you need to do your job.
Tudor, I'll put you in now, Dave. Tudor,
I'd just like to pick up on that in terms of mobile phone. Again, because of where I live. But has there been any further investigation in terms of provision of mobile phones? Because, using this when you're out and about, I don't find it fits into my top pocket of my shirt very easily. It's not. I know there's a phone device on this, but it doesn't work very well with where I live. And most of the inquiries that I have obviously either come in on email, but quite a lot come in by telephone, and then obviously I've got to go back to them, and that's to my cost really. And it's not a big issue, but I do feel that having a mobile phone would be a good benefit in terms of democracy and being able to connect with people.
Well, I think where we left it last time, Chair, was I think, John, you explained the functionality of the devices and that they do have capability for phone use. I think we said that if members broadly felt that mobile phones were needed, there would have to be a business case that we brought forward. But I think the conversation widened out into, if you don't have mobile phones and you're expected to use your own, you know, how do you get properly recompensed? What's the policies? What's the processes? You don't have to wait ages. So it's just opening up the conversation just to make sure that we're not missing anything. And if there are business cases that we need to take forward, then, you know, it's about how we pull them together and how we really build the right case, you know, for what it is that you need. And I appreciate it won't be the same for all of you. There will be different needs, I think, with different individuals. And, you know, councillor, as you point out in your area where you're so poorly served by broadband connectivity, it is especially an issue for you when you're having to get hold of me and go and stand in the middle of a field just to be able to take a call. It's pretty difficult, isn't it? And it opens up wider issues then, doesn't it? I think, for local democracy as well, because you are meant to be accessible. So, as I say, it may not be the case right across the board, but just be interesting to hear members' experiences and what we can do to try and make it easier for you.
Councillor Derby.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the deficiencies, as far as the piece of equipment are concerned, is singularly mine. Perhaps I'm getting a little bit ancient, but the change from the last one, some of the way you use it is different, and that's down to me. I think the piece of equipment is absolutely great. I really do. I think it's a big move forward. And the other thing about it is that you can use it in places where the other one, previous one, was too big. You know, and you get, even in the domestic situation, you get so many emails nowadays. I mean, it isn't tens. They come through in 3 figures. I guess officers suffer the same. There ought perhaps to be a thought about which emails that are being sent out willy-nilly are appropriate, because you've got to look at them and you've got to read them, and then, you know, and you get the way through before you think, well, this isn't really for me. And the other thing is, people do these chains, you know, where everybody wants to prove that they've read the goddamn email. And, you know, I get hundreds of people saying, me too, sir, and, you know, and all that sort of thing. So, but I mean, the equipment itself, there ought to be some ideas of what best practice is to everybody, officers as well. What is best practice as to how you should use the thing? I mean, nobody, I say this over and over again, people should not be trying to write War and Peace on one of these. It is meant to supply information briefly. It's meant to guide you to where to go in the main. That is what it's for. If you have well, pages on here, it defies the whole reason for having the thing. I mean, the thing I love about it is I don't have to go into the office at night to work with this. I can sit down with it. I've got like a little table now. I can sit down in the armchair in the lounge with my wife, and we can exchange words and whatnot. And we have some value time where we will be sat in different rooms, and you know that can't be a good thing. So I think it is really good, but some better practice by everybody, you know, would be helpful. Great piece of kit.
You know, very briefly, I just want to go back on the mobile phone issue. Certainly, you know, for me, speaking personally, it would be a big benefit. And when I worked for a reasonably sized organisation, they gave me a mobile phone, or BlackBerry as it was then, and then a mobile phone. But, you know, that was work. I don't want to give out my personal mobile. I obviously provide my address and my home number, and obviously lots of people use that. But I don't particularly want to give out my personal mobile to everybody. And I think it's something we really should think about. You know, that's my personal view. I don't know how other members feel.
Chair, I think what we could do is possibly arrange to survey members, you know, sort of
Yes.
more than midway through the year. In fact, we're coming up to the end of your, you know, for many of you, your first year. So it might just be a good time to touch base and just check how's everything going, from communication to devices to, I suppose, you know, are you feeling more familiar with processes and systems to contact different officers? Because I'm just acutely aware for new members in particular, it's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, I was out with Councillor Becker last week doing a ward visit, and just, you know, knowing who to go to, who to contact for basic things, you know, litter in the streets or trade waste not being picked up. You know, it just helps give you a bit of a guide. So I think it might be time just to do a bit of a check-in, make sure everybody's happy, comfortable, and to see if there's anything else we could be assisting with, really, to support your role.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going. I left it. Well, I wanted just to come back. Living in hope, Chairman, of catching your eye. I slightly differ, because I like the idea of somebody being able to catch hold of me on the telephone, or being able to leave a verbal message on the phone. And I've got a system at home where that works for me, and so I think it is difficult for you to try and please us all, because we have different ways of doing it. I think it's and some of them are brought on, of course, by the difficulty of the terrain where your ward is. That makes it difficult. But as Chepstow is the centre of the universe, as we all know, it isn't too much of a problem for me. Thank you, Chairman.
That's your thoughts. I don't disagree with what's being said, and I think, Kelly, if we sent a survey out to all members, asking them what's the good parts of it and what's the bad parts, the experiences they've had. I'm going to be honest with you, since I've had that, I got that on the side of me in the living room, and if the email comes in, it comes in, and I can pick it up, quite easy. But you're right in what you're saying. These are a lot easier to use than the big ones we had. And what I find on these, when they're working properly, it's quicker on you to access wherever you want. As you see, I just had mine back in from the doctors, which was fixed quite quickly and easily. And if we send a survey out to all members, we can get a feedback by hopefully by April of this year. The status of. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Can you put that down so it's on the agenda, please? Right. The next item is item 6, reports, in training and standards.
Yeah, that's me, Chair. That's right. Members, I was hoping to sort of open this agenda item up into a broader discussion around some key aspects of governance, and just, I suppose, check in with you just to see how certain things are working for you. There's just some little niggles and things that I'm picking up myself, so I'm sure that's replicated with you. So, first of all, there are some issues on the forward work planner, and just making sure that you all sit on various committees, you know that Cabinet makes decisions, you know that big policy decisions go to full council. But I think for you to sort of understand how it connects, it's visibility of our core work planners, so knowing when decisions are going to come through, what are the certain touch points when they go to various committees, so you can see the whole decision-making process through. So just to share some improvements we're trying to make to that, just to give it greater visibility, even to the public, so they can understand that, it isn't just when you see a Cabinet report, that's just the culmination of a decision. Where does this stuff come from? Where is it set out in service plans? When does it go to a select committee? When does it get scrutiny from audit committee? And so on. So just some improvements we're trying to make to shine a better light on that. There's some stuff as well that we're looking at around the hub. So we've got a space where we can start coordinating key dates. So DMT dates, circulation consultation dates. Just, I suppose, from a governance perspective, there's more of a rhythm to what we do. Rather than things just landing on you out of the blue, you can see where they've come from, where they've been discussed, how ideas have come about in the first place, how they've been conceived. I just think it's important, rather than you just see a decision when it's coming to the fore, you see some of the background to that. I think one of the issues that I've picked up on quite a lot in recent months is the quality of reports. And again, I'd really like to get some feedback from you. I think there are some issues where different templates have been used. Perhaps we haven't always checked on that. The quality of report writing, I think it can be quite variable sometimes. And again, you know, we're talking about giving officers some training on this, but it's not just on writing a report. It's when you conceive an idea, what's the process it goes through, what are the options you've looked at, how have you evaluated those, when does it go through scrutiny? You know, what are the stages before it actually gets into that decision-making territory? And I think it's really important for you as members to have sight of that. So I think there's some stuff we can do systems-wise to sort of make sure things are automated and they're, I think, perhaps more adequately sequenced. But just to get some views from you on what you think in terms of quality of reports, what you understand from them. Are they effective in doing the job? Are they effective in informing you and making sure you ask the right questions before decisions are even made? So I think, you know, that's something we could think about. I suppose going back to some coordinating issues, are the views of select committees being put forward on reports? Hazel, I know it's something that you've mentioned quite a lot. There is a consultation section on Cabinet and Council reports. Again, are we adequately reporting the views and the recommendations of Select Committee? Are they being carried through the process with enough visibility? Again, I think there's some clashes going on the calendar, and I think lots of you have come back to me and said, well, that's great you're holding the seminar then, but do you know all of these meetings are taking place? You know, I'm good, but I can't be in 3 places at once. And then some of the other issues we were talking about as well. I've noticed that sometimes this chamber isn't always available. And I think because of the shortage of meeting space in this building, this room is being used quite a lot. And I'd like to get your views on whether you think, you know, this room has sanctity as a sort of political decision-making room. I'd like to think it has, really. That's where decisions should be made. This is your seat of democracy. And the other thing, again, that I'm picking up, and I know we've made some progress, I don't know if it's enough, though, is do you know who is who? You know, do you have the right contacts for the right officers? Do you understand what they do? Are you able to sort of put your finger on a button and get the kind of response that you need in a timely way? And then last of all, we've just been thinking about the role of member secretaries. There's Rachel and Alison in John's team. And just understanding what kind of support you need. Are you aware of the role? How can we shine a light on it? And what is it? You know, it comes back to the question I've asked several times today. Are we doing enough to support your role and to enable it to develop as our locally elected members? So sorry to sort of chuck all of that in, but I think there's some stuff for us to get our teeth into. And if we can't get these basics right, then there's something wrong. So just to get some views and feedback, if I could, please.
Members.
Thank you. Very briefly from quite a long list then. I don't know about member secretaries at all, and I had no idea there was a support function there. I tend to go to Democratic Services for whenever I need a bit of support, so no, I didn't know that at all. And no, I still have no idea who I need to go to for everything. In terms of the different officers, I tend to hazard a guess somewhere near the top of the tree and then hope that they'll filter it down to the right level of person. And roughly, I would say so, yes. But then sometimes I've sent emails out and it seems to have fallen into a big pit of nothing and I've never heard back again. So then it's probably my job to chase them back up. But no, so I'd say there are definitely some holes for me as a newly elected councillor still in those 2 main areas.
What do you think would help?
Well, I know we were given that very big flow chart, but it was too big in many respects. So it would be quite useful to kind of go through the general issues that might come up as a ward representative. So thinking about what my constituents might actually need me to find out for them, and who would be those kind of very day-to-day running people that I would go in and get in contact with. So for things like things relating to the streets and dog mess, I'm afraid to say, isn't it the most boring one of all? But I know I can do things, I do as much as I can on the app, which works really well on my mobile phone, and I use that all the time when I'm out and about, actually, for the ward issues. But no, some of the ones which the residents have actually raised with me, and I'd really like to get a proper written response back to those residents as well.
Just ask as well, when you do use the app, are you getting feedback? So when an issue is closed off, are you because it's just another issue that I'm picking up, we're not always closing that loop back?
No,
yes,
sometimes
I have cleared up the dog fowl, or yes, that pothole is repaired.
Not always, no. And since Christmas, something odd has been happening. I was going to speak to IT about it. So I don't know if there's something now wrong with my phone about, I'm now getting a thing that instead of it saying that normally it used to be with reporting a street light, it would be, you have reported this street light, blah, 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 it's being passed to this. And now I'm getting a screen coming up saying, you must log in. I'm going, I don't know what... Yes, so I think there's an IT thing going on as well. So those are two areas.
Martin?
Thank you, Chair. I've moaned in the past about sending emails and requests and getting no response, and it's obviously not just me. Thank you very much for when you stepped in to help, and I have to say that people do respond immediately when they can see that you're copied into an email. It remains a problem. Even when action is about to be taken as a response to an email I've sent, for example, about street lighting recently, it's not communicated back. And so that leads me to make a second email to which the guy then says, oh, yes, we've got this sorted, but it would help if we knew, because obviously we're often the tool for passing on requests from our ward members. And it's very frustrating. And similarly, how shall I put this? When people say, yes, we'll do it, and then nothing happens, and I go back to voters and say, I have it from a leading officer at the county that action will be taken, and then 2 months later I have to go back and apologise. And that's embarrassing for me, and it reflects badly on the county, I think. Not big things, but things like branches being blown out of trees and damaging cars. Quite rightly, people say, can we get this sorted? I go to the people I think would do that, and they say, yes, we'll get the contractors in. 3 months down the line, nothing has happened. And in the storms a week or so ago, the same thing happens again. And that's the biggest frustration that I face. And just talking anecdotally with members in the members' room, I think that is an issue for quite a lot of members. And indeed, dare I say, particularly with some officers who are apparently fairly well known for not answering any queries from members. You also raised the issue about reports, and I would suspect that some more training for more junior officers that write reports would be useful. I like very much the idea that it is not leadership from the top, in which all reports would be written or very closely supervised by the chief officer. But at the same time, we get in more junior officers writing reports that are sometimes lacking in clarity, or in one case that I did raise with the chief exec, an adults committee, where the options for members, we were very clearly being offered no real options. It very firmly pointed to one option, even though 4 were mentioned. And the one that we were supposed to go virtually said, oh, well, this is obviously the one you want. Well, I'm sorry, you know, if we're scrutinising, we need all the facts, and we as elected members need to come to decisions. So, yes, I think I would agree with you that where it is not senior officers writing a report, that we would expect people to have had some training in writing reports that help us to do our job.
Absolutely, absolutely.
David? Councillor Devine?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there is a point that's it's come up here, and it's a delicate point, really, because it really gets to the issue about the response time over certain things. And I know a fellow councillor and I have a particular issue, and it's a serious issue. And we have been trying to deal with that and have written numerous times, together and separately. And at this time, it's over 8 months now, and we have had nobody on the ground to resolve this in any way, shape, or form. I actually, God, I'm going where I don't like to go. But the point is, I would just say this: at one stage, the person I wanted to see and my colleague and I wanted to see, we actually managed to, if you like, contain the officer in a room and really raise, no fisticuffs or anything like that were used. But I mean, it was like that, and to be honest, we thought something positive came out of it, and we have still not had any positive action, and it's in an area of crucial importance to our public, and I'm really quite concerned about it. I've been told, in all fairness, the words are snowed under, and I've even been told that by one of the principals as well were snowed under. Well, if we are that snowed under in terms of a key resource, then we've got to do something about it. And I mean, we've got to employ somebody else. I know, or move somebody that isn't under the same sort of pressures. But there are areas where we are really creaking at the seams. And this one area, as I say, I'll go as far as I'm prepared to go, is that I wrote one of the complainants. He actually got hit by a car the other day, and it was in an area where he was complaining about the traffic problems in the area, and it's difficult. I don't want to personalise this, but we do have a problem in some key areas, I think, where we're not thick enough on the ground.
Okay. I think I've got the message in the area from that, so thank you, Councillor Devine.
I didn't want to say that.
I don't want to sort of knock that down, but generally, in my experience in this first year, I've found the person that I want, or at least I've spoken to somebody who's like the AA. They know a man or a woman who can help you. People if it's not their area, they've passed it on. I seem to have had a lot of complaints about things like overgrown trees and hedges, etc. But those have always been dealt with, and we've had site meetings. And Mark Cleaver, one of your officers, has been particularly good on that. It is a contentious issue because there's no responsibility in some areas to cut the trees back. But obviously, if there are problems, I think the public think that as county councillors we have a sort of a red button to press. And if something hasn't been done before, then it will be done. But generally, yes, there is a lot to take on. I think I was on the town council for a year, and I built up one or two relationships that way. But I think if you're totally new and you're sort of thrown in at the deep end, I think that is an issue. But actually, feeding all that information out, and as my colleague here said, having a huge flow chart. Are you really going to sit down and follow it through? It tends to be by experience. But one of the things that I would say, you mentioned a number of issues that you raised, and the fact that this chamber is used a great deal. And I know this is set up for the video and for live streaming, etc. But in other meetings, say tomorrow I've got sort of Cared for Children panel, we're in a meeting room. And I feel it makes for a better meeting in that you're sitting around. I think we've discussed it before. This is almost, could be confrontational in a sense, and you're not facing each other. And I think facial expression, etc. in meetings is quite important, and that interaction. I sit on Sacre and we meet down in Mega, and we sit round, and that is more sort of consensual, really. You agree with people, or if you disagree, you're face to face. And I think this chamber is obviously great for full council meetings, which by the nature of the beast tend to be more confrontational. But in lots of other meetings, you need to find a sort of a via media, need to find a way through. And I think sometimes in a meeting room, then you can do that. And it is unfortunate that we are so short of space. For a meeting like this, with relatively few people, if you're all sitting around, say, a table like that, then I think it would make for a better meeting. And I think that is a serious sort of physical sort of resource issue that we've got with this building, which is great in lots of ways, but really isn't good in other ways. And I do think we need to think about that, because meetings need to be productive. And by sitting around, and I do think they tend to be more productive and less confrontational. Not that this one is, I know, but.
I mean, I think it's really for myself, John, Matt, Hazel and others to put in train a programme of activity around all of this stuff, so you can hold us to account as officers as well in terms of making sure we put, I suppose, restate some parameters, put those rules in place, make sure that, I suppose, that we go back to departments, and I suppose, Councillor Dovey, in terms of some of the issues that you mentioned, if this helps us to highlight significant resource and capacity issues that have to be addressed, then this is a means of addressing them. But I just wonder if it might be worth just putting all of this together just into a one-pager to capture it, just to guide some of the governance stuff we need to get right. I know the cabinet member is particularly keen just to sort make sure the basics are in place. And I suppose if we could bring that back to this committee, so you keep holding us to account on, even if it's little things, niggly things, they still need to be sorted out, I think.
Just on the issue of who to contact, it came up in the last term of council at Democratic Services Committee. We spoke about it before. One member was pushing for a full phone directory that we all used to have, but it was about this thick, and it was out of date as soon as you printed it. So what we tried to say was, give us the 20 or 30 most common services you use. We'll do you an A4 double-sided sheet. You can have it at home, stuck on your wall, and you've got the telephone numbers. You don't need names attached to it, because the numbers are generally the same. So as newer members, if you want to give me the most common services you found you're using at the minute, we'll just draft something together. It's really simple, really.
Is there a question to you, Kelly? Is there any means or preparation that downstairs in Steve Queensland's room could be other meetings and it could be televised, live streamed?
Yeah, we do have live streaming capability. I think you and Kyle set it up for cabinet meetings, John. So, I mean, whether all meetings could be live streamed at such short notice, I mean, we could certainly investigate it. It's just maximising use of the space that we've got, really, for the right things. I think that's what we're trying to achieve.
I think using this room for smaller meetings has been brought up before, and I think that's why we've looked at trying to move it downstairs. The problem at the minute, in the chamber we use YouTube. If we move somewhere else, we use Skype. They don't talk to each other because one's owned by Microsoft, one's owned by Google. So from a resident's perspective, they'd be going all over the shop looking for a meeting depending on which room it's in. That's not right at the minute. The next bit of working out what we need to do is whether we can get this onto Skype, the chamber, and that solves the problem. When we move everything over from YouTube, it's ongoing. We're still looking at it, but there is possibility to do it. We just need obviously investment in equipment as well for the rest of the meeting rooms downstairs.
Hazel, you sat there very quiet. Would you like to add anything?
All I'd have to add, Chair, is that some of the concerns that have been raised by members here have also been raised to me by other members who can't be here today, and they seem to be sort of chasing up ward-related issues with certain departments. It's definitely more focused in certain departments, and one councillor has been chasing up quite a dangerous issue for several months, pretty much since May, and hasn't had a resolution. So if she had been here today, I'm sure she would have raised that. But just to echo that some of the points that have been discussed, Councillor Grocott and I discussed before we met with WAO, there was quite a few things that came out of just a scrutiny briefing with members that highlighted that members are not really that aware of who to contact and how to get hold of certain officers, and maybe on the receiving end, officers are not necessarily understanding the councillor's role in passing over concerns and community issues. So we've got, I think, a job to do in terms of making sure that everybody understands what the role of a councillor is, so that you're not thought to be just people ringing up nagging with issues. You're signposting your messages really on behalf of your communities. So as Kelly said, I think that's something we need to look at in more detail.
I think one other point as well is I know you've got some new people down on reception, and if you ring into reception, and I've had this come back from other members, you get put through to the wrong department or the wrong person, you know, and then you got to ring back through. Okay. All right, Councillor Devi.
Just a very quick one, Chairman. I'd like to make the point I'm not in any way whinging. In fact, I find the service I get from officers in the main is really first class. But this particular one, I will provide you with the name of the other elected member as well, so you can speak to him to get a feeling for the veracity of what I've said or not. But the point that really does concern me is that if somebody, I mean, it's painfully obvious. If somebody speaks to me and it's about something that's of importance within the ward, and I pass it on and write about it, and nothing gets done about it, you get to a point where you can't keep saying, well, I've done something about this, you know, because it leaves a really bad impression. Either I'm lying or somebody isn't doing something. That's what it comes down to. And whichever way you spin the coin, it comes down the wrong side as far as the council is concerned. We don't want that.
Thank you. Can we put that on the agenda for next time as well, please? Right. Number 7 is members' training. Who's taking that?
I think Hazel's going to take this one, Chair.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one, Chair. Just to give you a bit of an overview of the recent training that we've conducted for members, following the induction schedule through which you will have had lots of training, we did sort of notice that some of the attendance at certain really important training sessions was not that great, but there was a bit of an overkill really, I guess, in terms of the May-June period for you. So some of the training we need to rerun, particularly around safeguarding, and you'll have been aware of that recently, but also on equalities. And we're going to set a date for you to have some equalities training in the next few weeks. We held some training on the role of a modern counsellor, which I believe most of you attended, if not everyone here. And that, I think that was a really useful session to bring in a private trainer who was able to give you his experience as a former elected member and also leader of an English council. And he's got lots of different perspectives on changes now within England and Wales, which will help. We want to maximise the opportunity for everybody to attend that session. So we've specifically written to those who weren't able to attend to try and set up a session to ensure that they are able to attend. And I'm surprised because the time that the members picked was possibly the last time that I would have thought that they would have liked to have met. So they've opted for an evening session, and either on the Thursday the 1st of February or Friday the 2nd of February. It's not something that I would have immediately have suggested, so it just goes to show it's best to double check with members what suits them. But a Friday at 5 o'clock might be what members have chosen for the repeat session of training. Given that the training costs and repeating the training will be just as expensive as the first session, we need to make sure that we get maximum attendance on that, hoping for 99% attendance overall. So that's in hand. Also, we had some sessions set up for scrutiny members specifically, and that was joint training with Torfaen, and that was to be held on the 9th of January, but unfortunately very unforeseen circumstances for the trainer, we had to cancel that session, which is a shame. So we'll be looking to rebook that for later in the year. But it was a special session in the morning for all members on effective scrutiny, and then specific training for scrutiny chairs and vice chairs in the afternoon. So if we can't get the trainer perhaps to run that session in the next sort of couple of months, then we'll look to do that in-house to make sure that everybody's had the training. But that's parked for the meanwhile. As I said, Paula and I are working with Alan Burkitt. We will probably bring in an external trainer to run as a double act with Alan Burkitt, because there are some messages that I think members need to hear that are quite difficult sometimes for officers to impart. And I think it would be a useful and cost-effective session. We've discussed prices, and it's pretty good. So hopefully we'll have that for you in the next couple of months. That's really it in terms of the Scrutiny Member Development Programme. But if members have got wider needs, scrutiny or not scrutiny, here's the place to discuss them, and we can look to programme them in.
I've got to say the last training we had on the role of the modern councillor was very effective, and the deliverer, his name escapes me at the moment, but he was particularly good at delivering. But as well, there was quite a bit of active learning then, wasn't there, in terms of scenarios and discussions. And I think at the end of the day, sort of learning by doing is the best way. But the inputs that he gave, I think across the board were very good, and I think everybody was there came out feeling that it had been a very worthwhile session. And I think everybody, I certainly gained a great deal from that. And it was done in a very active way, and I think the time went quickly, but we learned a lot, and I commend MCC for that.
We are trying to sort of incorporate some active learning, really, because training sessions are not supposed to be like seminars where you just turn up and you're briefed. We want to make sure everybody understands the key messages, and I think that session was very deliberately planned to be run in that way, and we trialled it, and I think it was really successful.
Thank you, Chair.
Go and see the vet, I'm afraid.
I'm glad Hazel mentioned the scrutiny training, and it was really disappointing it couldn't go on. But I think the really positive thing about that was that it was joint training with members from Torfaen. And I think the more we can get to see how other councils operate, not only does it mean that we're halving the cost to an individual authority if we bring another one in, but also it would give me some reassurance that the world hasn't gone mad if I could sit in another authority and do some training with their members where the political persuasion might be rather different to this one. I'll say no more than that.
Anybody else want to come in? Do you want to reply back to that?
I'm just going to ask Hazel really to sort of outline if there are any longer term plans, because I think, Hayes, you've highlighted to me this isn't just one-off stuff. It's about having a programme that we can put in place that's got some sequence and order to it, and to give members assurance that for the the remainder of the term that facility is going to be there.
Yes, we've got a scrutiny member development programme which is approved by the Scrutiny Chairs Group. They've seen it for the first time, but probably don't recall because it was not long after members were elected. But that sort of training programme is specifically for scrutiny members. As I say, some of the training suggestions have come that are wider in terms of equalities and future generations. So we've built those in. But in terms of longer term evaluation of scrutiny itself, we've just completed a scrutiny self-evaluation, which was published back in November. I'm not sure if everybody's seen the full report, but I'm happy to bring it here, Chair. It was a very full and conclusive study of our own arrangements. It had three aspects to it: a self-evaluation by a peer-reviewed team, which was scrutiny chairs, myself, and a lead officer. It was a peer exchange group, which was the equivalent people of other authorities. That was Newport and Torfaen, and also Caerphilly. And then we had a questionnaire which went to all staff, and we had responses from that. And we pulled that together into a self-evaluation report, which is basically a sort of report to assess the fitness of the state of scrutiny in Monmouthshire at the moment. Largely positive, but did identify some of the issues that I myself had seen over time and are issues for the Scrutiny Chairs Group to take forward. But as part of the self-evaluation, we did visit other authorities. They visited ours. We took part in their scrutiny meetings in an observation capacity. We had direct feedback from them. And I think for new members, you won't have had that opportunity to do that yet, but we're willing to continue that process because it is good in terms of having a self-evaluation that's backed up with some external validation as well. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. We've had a WAO assessment of scrutiny, which is a national study. They began their first session interviewing us, and some of you new members will have been interviewed by them. They're now progressing through the rest of Wales, and they'll produce a full report on the state of scrutiny in Wales, whether it's fit for future, and they'll probably produce like a short local report and summary as well.
Yes.
One sort of generic point I'd want to make is, as somebody who's new, came in, last May, but I've been surprised at times how thin the attendance has been at some of the training events, and obviously there are a number of new members from all political persuasions, and I think it's important. Obviously, it's in my sort of outlook, it's part of the brief is that you've got to take part in the training, because whatever your background. Most people are relatively new to being an elected member, and I think attendance after training has got to be not pressured but pushed up, I think, in that sense, because from a public perspective, electors want to see people who are well trained and are able to deal with the capacity of the job. And I've got to agree with Councillor Martin Croker in terms of perhaps working a little bit with other authorities. In that way, you do learn, and particularly sort of best practice and different authorities. And I think, not going back too much to that previous training, but the good thing was having somebody who'd been a leader in a big authority and had faced all the issues and was obviously very au fait with them. I think that helped. And I think sometimes in an authority like this, although we're not terribly rural, but we are in some ways a little bit cut off as compared to somewhere like Caerphilly or Cardiff, where they can sort of interact more readily. I think that's important. And I feel as well that sort of the equalities training is an important bit, because certainly from the scenarios, I think some people learned quite a lot from that. And I think, particularly as equality is concerned, I think it's often age related. I put myself in the higher age bracket, but for lots of people, things have moved on, but they don't realise that, and people use words and phrases or speak to people in a particular way. And it's you can see it's at the forefront in national politics at the moment, but the way people speak to other people. Well, there was something on yesterday, and somebody said, well, I said to a lady, you know, what a marvellous hairstyle she had. Well, in my book, that's nothing to do with the job of being an elected member. I'm not in a position to make a comment on hairstyles, and you know, probably other people aren't as well. But on all sorts of issues, and on things like, you know, the use of Welsh language, etc., all of that is important, and other equality issues and diversity issues. Unless you've been in the swim of that, perhaps you're a little bit behind the times. I am as well.
If I could just respond quickly, Chair, I agree, and it is very difficult when you're chasing members to attend training, but I think apart from the fact that it's costly if it's involving external trainers, you're right, the public expect that members will be trained, and if, in my view, some of the training should be mandatory, particularly around the scrutiny training, but I think the main thing to remember is that when we put on training, it's to help you. It's because we believe that we can help you and assist you in your role, and some members don't feel that they actually need the training, which is sometimes a little concerning. Others think that they've had the training before and perhaps they don't need to, and it's often a case of repeating training because the environment in which you're working, and Ian pointed this out, Ian Bottrell, the trainer, is constantly changing. So whilst we might have trained you on something before, because the dynamic environment in which you operate is constantly changing, you will need more training, further training, different training, refreshed training. So the reason we're trying to do this, and we're always pushing training at you, is to help you in your role.
If I can come in there, Hazel, I know sometime, but I think it was before Christmas, we had email sent out what training we had attended, and it was quite obvious there was some members hadn't attended any, or very little. Do you think it would be a good idea to send that out again, an up-to-date one, to the leaders of the different groups, so that, you know, they're made aware, and when they have the group meetings, they can say, look, I've had this, you didn't attend this, you didn't attend that, you didn't attend that. Because if you're on planning, or if you're on standards or licensing, you have to have the training before you can attend them meetings, or you take part in them. And I think it's right what's been said. I think it should be that you go to the training, or you don't go to the meetings, or selects, or whatever.
I think you're right in terms of the responsibility does sit with the group leaders. I think if there's issues with member attendance at meetings in general, that always has to be passed back to a group leader to address, and I think the same with training. So yes, it would be worth myself and perhaps John digging out some of the attendance records and identifying perhaps some of the people who really need to attend some training that have missed training, and getting it pursued that way.
Yeah, like Hazel said, the difficulty we've got is that as members aren't employees, and there isn't a mandatory or legislated requirement for any member to attend a training session, we haven't got any disciplinary action as an authority that we could do. It's self-regulated by the parties themselves. I think on Councillor Evans' point there, it might be worth the response to the leaders coming from yourself with a recommendation that the committee has got concerns about levels of attendance at training sessions, and could then potentially consider a recommendation to full council for penalties to be put forward. That's the only way we would get around it, is an amendment to the Constitution that if attendance across all committees drops below a certain level, then you're not entitled to your salary for that month. That's in place in some authorities for members because they are concerned about attendance levels at committees. But that's got to come from that side of the chamber and an agreement at full council to amend the constitution that way, rather than it being officer-led, because there is no legislative requirement for us to drive it forward. But that would be my recommendation, Chair.
I mean, one of the other ways tied to that, Chair, is just some, I suppose, through the use of sort of clever data analytics, some way of capturing who attends meetings. So the electorate, when they come to make their decisions, they can see how their representatives have attended meetings. It's all on the website, but, it might be better accessible via an app, or, sometimes you sort of see digital voting. You see there's a method of understanding who's voted for what on particular issues. So you can, before you put your note in the ballot box, you can understand how a particular member, has sort of fronted up to certain issues. So there are a number of different ways I think we could create visibility with perhaps going down the sanction route. There just may be some things that we could consider.
It's just one final point, Chair, and that was my own learning really from trying to find suitable dates for members. Sometimes the dates you think members would least prefer happen to be the ones that they most prefer. I would never have picked a Friday at 5 o'clock for training, but, no. So, I think perhaps when we do sort of look to organise sessions, we just need to bear in mind that particularly the feedback that I had from the members that couldn't attend the training run by Ian Bottrell was that it wasn't a case of they weren't interested in the training, it was that they were working. They were working through the day, and therefore they weren't able to take leave, and actually they would have preferred an evening session. So I think sometimes we need to bear that in mind and have like an alternative and rotate dates and times, because whilst most of our meetings are in the daytime and people have opted to go on select committees or not according to their their capabilities with work and so forth, perhaps with training we've got to be a little bit more flexible, even if it's not what we would consider the most ideal time.
But I don't think a Friday night is... I think they might have had a bottle of wine too many. So is the committee happy that we as a committee write to the leaders explaining our concerns about lack of attendance from some members on training? You happy with that? Yes. Good. Right, thank you. Number 8 is remote attendance and work programmes.
Yes, Chair, I'll take this. It was just a check-in really around remote attendance. Obviously, we've had a council decision. We've amended the constitution via the good work of our monitoring officer, rather. So just to see if the facility is being used. I know we have to be notified ahead of use. But, just to make sure that we're availing ourselves of it. We know it's there, we're promoting it, we're using it wherever possible. And Hazel, I suppose, going back to your point about attendance at training, whether some of the remote accessibility could be arranged in future. I know particularly around things like the safeguarding training, which is very important. We want all members to have sight of it. Not everybody can attend a physical session, and just making sure that we're optimising the use of the facility now that we have it. We got plaudits for good practice. Well, it's only good practice if we practice it. So just to make sure, Chair, that we are taking those opportunities to use it.
Any questions from the members? Yes.
Can I just check, what is actually available for us at the moment? So what meetings is it possible to have remote attendance for? Because I'm not sure, as members, that we do know what it is possible. I think Cabinet is the only one that I know that you can attend remotely, but is there anything else that we are actually able to attend remotely yet?
It all depends on where the meeting's being held to start off with, because the equipment is only available in the conference room. At the moment, it's only Cabinet that is that has used remote attendance. If you do want to consider remote attendance, I'd suggest having a chat with the chair, because really it'd be up to the chair as to whether they want to allow it in the committee, and that's something I've discussed with the monitoring officer as well. If a chair doesn't want to utilise the remote attendance at some meetings, so for example, let's take planning as an example. Planning is always held in here. If we could get the facility up here, would it be utilised? Possibly not, because would we want representatives who come in to talk on behalf of an applicant doing that remotely? Is it that far we take it? Are we just doing it for members? If you want something, I think that ask. Come and speak to me. Come and ask, and we'll see if we can take it forward. I think that's the best thing. Is really we're learning as we go along at the minute.
Anybody else? No? Do you want to say anything else on that? No, that's fine. Thank you. Number 9, alignment issues failing from the coordinating board.
I'll just kick this one off, Chair, if I can, but I think
Yes.
Hazel's going to speak to it substantively. You'll know, members, or perhaps you won't, but previously we had a coordinating board, and the idea of that was to bring together select committee chairs. It was to invite along Mr. White, who chairs our audit committee. It was about bringing together sort of chairs of area committees, just so that we could have a collective conversation about where joining up needs to happen, where we could get some alignment opportunities, making sure there was a sequence and a flow, I suppose, to some of the work, so there wasn't repetition, things were able to scale, and if there was good practice, we could essentially share it. I think it lost its way a little bit over the years, and I think for that reason, members concluded probably, Hazel, about 8-10 months ago, that actually we would cease continuing with coordinating board. But just reflecting on some of the changes we've made to the Constitution, some of those activities still need to take place. So now that coordinating board doesn't exist, I think some of those responsibilities and some of those accountabilities about making sure we're having those connected conversations does fall to the work of this committee. So I think, Hazel, you just wanted to sort of make sure that we're doing that, to remind Democratic Services Committee of their responsibilities in that regard, and just to check, really, what do we need to make sure that we're connecting around?
In terms of the sort of closing of the coordinating board, it was a meeting I was asked to cover, and I was surprised because members were actually quite keen on sort of disbanding the board, but there were certain issues that they wanted to address and make sure were addressed through other means. And some of this, as Kelly's alluded to, is around the coordination of the Cabinet and Council Forward Planner and the Select Committee planners. But also there were several sort of issues really specifically to Mr. White's sort of distance perhaps from our corporate planning side of things. So his sort of awareness of what the council was doing was largely brought through the coordinating board. So what we agreed when we disbanded the coordinating board was that we would have the weekly updates to the Cabinet and Council Forward Planner emailed to all members, including the Chair of Audit, on a Friday, which is undertaken by Nicola. The difference is that the Chair of Audit didn't used to receive those, and he now should get those. Also, he had some issues where he couldn't access like our intranet, so we said that would have to be a PDF or give him access to the hub so that he could access those, and that we would ensure that Mr. White was invited to member seminars and Democratic Services Committee. So I'm not sure, looking at the attendance list here today, whether he's invited to this, but we resolved also to invite him to meetings of the Scrutiny Chairs Group, and he did say that he wasn't sure he'd want to attend all meetings, but he'd see how it went, because in terms of his other responsibilities, he just wanted to have more of an idea of what the corporate planning side of things was, and he felt that perhaps the best way of doing that wasn't the coordinating board, but he needed some involvement. So I just wanted to check that those things are now actioned, and then to seek your views really on, it sort of merges into item 9, whether you would like to ensure that the Democratic Services Committee gets the updated Scrutiny Forward Work Programme and the Cabinet and Council Planner as a matter of course. It's where that should perhaps sit now, in terms of the coordinating board not existing. Should that responsibility sit here? And that's really something for you to discuss today, Chair.
At the last coordinating board, I was there, and it was said it was like it become a talking centre, lip service. It was just fading out. Going back to your query about Mr. White, yes, we did give him an open invitation to come to these meetings, and he said as long as we notified him, he would, like you said, he didn't want to come to everyone, but he would like to come to a few. So that invitation is still open for him. But for us to take on board, this committee to take on board some of the issues that went to the coordinating board, yes, it would be nice for us to take it on, but we need a fresh update on what's been going on since the coordinating board ceased.
Thank you, Chair. I think this committee serves a very valuable function in coordinating the work that goes on in the County Council. I think as we move forward, the Public Service Board Select Committee, which is trying to do the same sort of work with the new PSB, needs to be brought closely hand in glove with the work of this committee, because I would hope that over time that Public Service Board will come to play a very vibrant part in the life of the county, bringing together expertise from right across the spectrum. And I think that officers need to think very carefully about how the work of this committee and the work of the PSB Select can really be hand in glove.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. I have to confess, not having been on the council when the coordinating board existed, I'm not really sure what we're being asked to take on. And looking at my other two members behind me, they weren't on the council then either. So it's a little bit difficult being asked to take on an area of responsibility when I'm not really sure what the actual purpose of it is. Is it the idea that we're meant to take a view of what's going on across all of the select committees and have an assessment of that and see whether there's any room for manoeuvre? I'm not quite sure what we're being asked to take on board as a committee. So more clarification, please.
In terms of the coordinating board, its remit was much wider by the end. It had sort of become a discussion forum. It actually discussed a lot of the things that you discuss here around members' needs, technology, equipment. So I think it did fizzle out because its role was kind of subsumed by this committee when this became a statutory committee. The coordinating board wasn't a statutory committee, whereas this is. So really that was kind of the death of it, really. But its responsibility around the Cabinet work programme and the Select work programmes was just to ensure oversight, to make sure that there wasn't duplication, so that Cabinet were aware of what Scrutiny was doing, Scrutiny was aware of what Cabinet was doing. So the main thing was making sure that both programmes were fully up to date and were brought to an actual meeting for a short discussion. So what would take place would be the chair of each of the Select Committee would just give a quick overview of the major issues that are perhaps in front of their committee in the short term. It would only take 5 minutes each chair. It wouldn't be talking about every single item, but it would be making sure that members know if a joint select committee has been arranged, or if a special select committee involving more than one committee has been arranged, maybe CYP and adults together. And the area committees used to give updates as well. Well, the select committees and the council updates were actually quite short. The area committee updates tended to be very, very long. So I think in terms of what I would expect would be a short item on each of your agendas, a standing item as we've put there for item 9, with the updated Scrutiny Forward Work Programme and the Cabinet Council Planner, and just for you to sort of check that you're happy that there isn't duplication across the board. If you'd like a quick overview, Chair, of some of the things that have improved and been sort of actioned since the coordinating board. A couple of them that I've got noted are we've included a scrutiny question template to all select agendas. So it's a generic question template to help members pose some questions if they didn't have any of their own. They're very general questions around policy, performance, and they're sort of a helpful hint. So that's been added to all the select agendas. We also agreed that member seminars would be half-day or day sessions pre-booked in advance so that we try and give you more notice, and I believe Nicola's done that. There's separate sort of days scheduled in the council diary for presentations and seminars. We also agreed that we'd work on the template for the political reports, because one of the main things was that the view of scrutiny was not being actually included into the officer's report. So when it went for an individual cabinet member decision or it went to cabinet, unless the officer had gone back to the minutes of the scrutiny meeting and taken out the scrutiny chair's conclusion, it wasn't actually put forward in the officer's report as evaluation scrutiny concluded this. So it would say consultees select committee, but it wouldn't say what they said. And we had members, cabinet members, scrutiny chairs and the WAO asking us, well, how can members of the public, or how is your cabinet expected to know what the views of scrutiny are if it's not in that officer report? So Kelly and I have done quite a lot of work on that template, and the latest template is only like couple of weeks old, and that's been distributed to all officers, and Nicola is constantly reminding officers if that doesn't meet, if reports are not meeting the template. So you'll start to notice over the coming weeks that the scenario that we had with Adult Select Committee, where we were given one particular sort of option, and that was the favoured option, even though there was 4 options in total. We've started to get officers to write a more balanced options appraisal style report, and to actually include in the sort of consultee section what has been consulted upon, who did they consult with, and what generally were the findings, what were the views of the people that were consulted on, because the scrutiny chairs take quite a bit of time in their meetings concluding on every item to try and draw a concise summary of what the committee thinks, what the consensus is on something. And if that's not being reflected adequately in the officer report, then it begs the question, why did they spend 3 hours looking at that? So it sounds simple, and in an administrative sort of fashion it is simple, but it's something we weren't doing, and it's making a real big difference, but only perhaps you would notice perhaps since December onwards. So those are a few of the things that we've done. And then we also, as a result of the meeting where we disbanded the coordinating board, we made key changes to ensure that Mr. White was more included, less isolated. We upgraded his sort of access to IT, so he's now got full access to things like the performance dashboard and sort of corporate things, as the chair of audit committee should be aware of. So there's a lot more things that we could do, and I suggest that now we haven't got the coordinating board, some of those things that were discussed here really should now sit with you in terms of perhaps increasing voter turnout. I know Kelly's started meeting with some of you to go through on ward member visits, that kind of thing, to understand what the issues are in your wards and to try and sort of address those through the earlier point that we made around sort of ward issues not getting followed up and progressed. So those are things, Chair, that I would believe would sit well under your future committee remit.
Any questions? No? Are you happy now? Yes, thank you. Right. So we'll take on board, this committee will take on board or pick up from the coordinating board issues then. And if we can be updated for the next meeting, which is the 5th of February, you know, and then we can act on that. And perhaps we can form some small workshops where a few of us are working on different things and then reporting back to this committee. So whatever's decided here will go to the council. Because we just can't be sitting here as a talking shop. We've got to be seen to be doing something and getting involved. Number 10 is select updates and reports to council.
So this follows on, Chair, from the points that this used to sit with the coordinating board. So I've provided the Scrutiny Forward Work programme there. It's for information and for you to see whether you feel there's any duplication there. But the main thing that I would draw to your attention at the moment is that we're having to have quite a few special select committee meetings, additional meetings, because the business is just too much. And we've had one particular meeting that would have been coming up on the 23rd of January, an adult select that had sort of 6 or 7 items for scrutiny, and the committees have decided that really they need to just prioritise 3 items per meeting, no more, because they can't do those, they can't scrutinise those and do them justice. So you will notice that there's lots of special select committees. Just for members to be aware, you can attend any select committee regardless of whether you're a member of that select committee, and we do have lots of members observing that aren't actually on the select committee, and I think that does help, because with the political balance often the same members are on the same select, so it is useful for those who aren't perhaps able to sit on a select to attend another. And as you'll notice, we had a joint meeting this morning. We're going to have probably a couple of joint meetings between CYP and adults, and possibly one between CYP and strong communities, which I'm going to discuss with the chair. Okay. So the role really for you, I guess, is to have a look at the Scrutiny Forward Work programme. I mean, we're sort of, we're basing what we scrutinise upon what we've chosen are our priorities for this year, but obviously we do look at the Cabinet Forward Planner and see what's coming through. So as long as the Cabinet Forward Planner is always up to date, anything that we're aware of that's coming through, members can decide if they want to have sight of that report or bring it forward for scrutiny. So it's a case of us relying on the Cabinet and Council Forward Planner, not really vice versa, because we can also do our own things and look at our own sort of priorities, but we are heavily reliant on that planner to base our pre-decision scrutiny specifically.
Well, we're talking about selects and all, and any member can go. I've had some concerns from members about going to the cabinet meeting, and they've changed it. You've got to give 5 days notice if you want to ask a question, and there's some concern about that, because they concerns about it, and they're asking why was it changed and who changed it.
Chair, yeah, I've just been to pre-council, and this was an issue raised at pre-council. I believe at the last cabinet meeting, the arrangement was changed slightly. So I believe now that if questions are going to be asked on particular topics, those questions are logged with the leader 5 days beforehand, and questions do need to be kept to the topic of the reports. I think what I suggested at pre-council was that if there are any questions, the leader is approached directly, and if this committee do want to ask any questions of the leader, then they can certainly do that, invite the leader in, and just make sure that process is clear and understandable to all.
So any member can still go?
Any member can attend cabinet. Any member can attend cabinet, but the process of asking questions, yes, it does have to be recorded, and I suppose it is in the gift of the leader to decide when and how those questions are put. So if there is any clarification, Chair, then maybe you would want to invite the leader along to ask what that process is.
I think that's good. I think that the feeling of today, since I've been in here, is that that's what they're going to want to know. So can we invite the leader to our next meeting, which is the 5th, and see why he's decided to go down this path? Do you agree with that? Yes, Councillor Wood.
Can I check how long in advance is the cabinet plan put out? So saying that you've got to get a question 5 days in advance, isn't it not? I'm not up to date with how cabinet operates, not sitting on it. Therefore, when is the agenda actually announced? I mean, does that actually give members enough time to register a question, to kind of have read the agenda, have read necessary reports, and then be actually able to ask insightful questions? I mean, what's the timings?
The agenda's 5 working days. So whether the leader's taking it as 5 days or 5 working days, I'm not sure what his process is. From the discussions I've had with the leader about it, he's put it in place so that cabinet members can give a fuller response to members rather than being asked a question on the spot and not having necessarily the answer to hand, so at least they'll be able to give a fuller response. And the other thing I would add is that other authorities, some of the cabinet meetings are closed. The no opposition members are allowed in, they're not allowed to ask questions, they just told what the decision is and it's subject to the call-in. So the process here is open and inclusive. It's just something the leader wanted to put in to allow the cabinet members to give a fuller response at the time. But
Yeah, I think, the leader should be able to explain his rationale, but I think it's a really important question because, even if the agendas go out 5 days before, I suppose it goes back to the point that I was making about, if work planners are out there, they're visible, you can see what's coming up, what a decision's going to be made before it's even agendaed, the topic and theme, so you can start planning your interventions or your questions upstream rather than having to react. So I think, making the process as open and transparent and accountable as possible. And John is right, we have traditionally been very open as a council. It's good practice. That's what Wales Audit Office has said. And I know from a cabinet point of view, they'd like to maintain that as far as possible. I think it's part of our value set as a whole organisation.
I think it's important that we do invite the leader to the meeting on the 5th of February, and I've certainly picked up some disquiet today, and I think it needs to be addressed really and discussed. And I take the point that John makes, but obviously we're talking about this authority, and in my mind, obviously we're working in a democracy, so everything needs to be as open and transparent as possible. And I think it's very important that we do invite the leader to this group for the next meeting.
Number 11 is the future Monmouthshire workshops.
Thank you, Chair. And just a brief explanation, because I know many of you have been involved, and I'm sure Hazel will want to come in because lots of this has been led through the scrutiny mechanism. But just some work that we've tried to do with Economy and Development Select Committee, really, even though they've opened that up and ensured that all members can be engaged. Under the Future Monmouthshire umbrella, which is about us understanding the shifts and changes we're going to see as a county and how this council can respond to some of those in line with future generations' requirements. We've started lots of different pieces of work looking at how we use our asset base differently, how we can get the best out of our staff, thinking about how we can use data differently. We've looked at different ways and means of delivering services in the future. So one of those themes that we've looked at and we found to be quite important to our operating model in the future is procurement, how we buy in goods and services. As an Economy and Development Select Committee, they've been particularly taken with that theme because obviously procurement drives the local economy, it drives local supply chains, it drives local businesses. And what that Select Committee has decided to do is to I suppose, more fully utilise some of the skills and some of the attributes they bring as locally elected members. So recognising lots of our members do a day job, they've got professional skills, they've got business backgrounds, they've got experience. And rather than us as officers just go off and think we can solve problems, get that input, get that feedback, get that experience, get that knowledge. So rather than just having task and finish groups, which, Hazel will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, which somehow strike me as a little bit tired. Sometimes we can spend meetings and meetings and meetings deciding who's going to chair a task and finish group and who's going to be on it. What we've tried to do is offer up a workshop format where people can be more engaged, they can get at the detail, we can have discussion, we can have conversation. Some of it is off camera, so people feel a bit more relaxed about some of the contributions and the questions they can ask. So we've made some significant progress, just over 3 sessions. We've got clear priorities. We've got another one tomorrow where we're all going to learn a little bit more about the circular economy and how local procurement supply chains can give back to the local economy, how us as a council can make sure that we're getting, I suppose, to work with the people that share our value set. So it's a really good piece of work. I think it enables us to all roll up our sleeves and to make a contribution. And, you know, I think as well, we're identifying potential for cost savings, for effectiveness benefits. So I think it enables members to feel a little bit closer to the action rather than just scrutinise things before they come to a decision or say, yes, we like that or we don't. You know, get in it, get a bit more immersed in it. So there's real practical application. And I think, Hazel, from your perspective, is certainly something that you're thinking could be scaled up across other select committees. And if we do review select committees, it could be the best way of working in the future.
It certainly seems to be more engaging for members because scrutiny meetings are there to hold the public, hold people to account in front of the public. They're there to do pre-decision scrutiny, but they're not the best forum to sort of look at policy development and develop sort of innovative ideas. Then you've got member seminars where really you're presented to. You turn up, you get some information, fine. I think the difference with these workshops compared to task and finish groups, which we've had at any particular time, we've had up to 10 task and finish groups running, and they've been really protracted because people dip in and out. That the groups maybe meet over the course of a year, say they meet 10 times over the course of a year. People will attend one meeting but not attend the next meeting, and then you spend the whole of the next meeting going back over what you did at the previous meeting for people to sort of recap. And also, because they were scrutiny-led, it didn't give perhaps anybody else any sense of responsibility to go away and further the work. So I would coordinate them, I would set them up, members would turn up, some officers would turn up, we'd have a good discussion, and then I'd be left with progressing all the work, and we had up to 10 groups operating. And the problem was that they then started to take longer and longer to complete. Members got disenfranchised with them. So attendance would start to wane because they felt that action wasn't happening quick enough. And often scrutiny missed the boat in terms of impact. But because by the time we pose some recommendations to the Cabinet member, if something had been highlighted that the Cabinet member perhaps really wanted to address, they would have addressed it before we do it in our report, which then would mean that we didn't get perhaps some of the kudos for having done the work in the first place. And what we've also realised is that the sort of things that we need to look at, that members want to look into, like future Monmouthshire procurement, are things that officers are working on anyway as high priority issues. So rather than be on the back foot, setting up our own task groups, while officers have actually got really sort of progressive groups, working groups on the go that are progressing at a much quicker pace, we thought it was better to actually work with the officers and develop those groups so that they're not just a scrutiny group. They could have Cabinet members on them. They're open to all select members, and because they're workshops, then there's not so many of them. It means that you haven't got to sign up to be on a task group where there's like 12 meetings and you've got to make them all. So it doesn't have that dipping in and out, but it does mean that in the 3 hours that you met, and we tried a different style of working. Rather than a task group with lots of paperwork, we did sort of a carousel workshop where each sort of group had a set of scenarios, and then they moved around so that everybody had a chance to discuss the same issues and come back. It was much more interactive for members, and we found that they were more engaged. There was really good attendance. So we've run several of these now, and the benefits really are that they're progressing quicker, members are more involved in the action, it's action learning, and then in terms of carrying forward actions, there's officers that are dedicated to wanting to resolve these issues and deliver some of this, rather than me just like writing a report in a year's time saying these are a set of things that scrutiny has recommended. So it's much quicker and it's much more responsive, and I've found that the level of interest from members is greater. So that we've tried several of these now, and some of them are under the auspices of Economy and Development Select Committee, but they seem to be very successful and members are enjoying them. So that's sort of similar approach to what we had tried with the training, where we set up workshops and you had to go around different workshops and actually play more of a role and be involved, rather than just be passive recipients of information on what officers have been doing lately. Does that help?
Thank you. The next economy development, I am attending that. I've been invited there, so I will be attending that. Is there any questions to Hazel?
It's not a question, it's more of a slight feedback, but one of my colleagues was very encouraging and very enthusiastic about the style of the procurement workshop that was going on, and felt it was actually very productive, and is very much looking forward to doing it in future. So it's not my particular area of interest, but it sounds like it was a definite thing that was really good for them. Do it under CYP, and I probably could attend a bit more. But yeah, it sounded like it was a very interesting, dynamic way of working. So it sounds a good idea.
Any other? No?
To say, and that's on the cabinet agendas. We always have as a standard sort of item reports from select committees, and then typically in brackets it says none, because that is reflective of the previous days where we had constant task groups putting forward scrutiny reports. So it's often noted at cabinet, oh, scrutiny haven't been up to anything much again lately because there's no reports from select committees. For some time, I did write a report which had all the scrutiny's conclusions for all of the select committees throughout the whole year, and that was reported to Cabinet because we didn't have the right political report template. So that report template I spoke about, where we've tried to capture scrutiny's conclusions in the actual reports that go forward for decision, when that wasn't happening, in order to try and capture scrutiny's conclusions and make sure that they went somewhere, as into Cabinet, but also the Wales Audit Office thought that they should be somewhere, I used to produce a report to Cabinet quarterly with all of those in there. But now that we've revised the report template and we're doing it the right way, as in scrutiny's conclusions go to Cabinet in a timely manner, we don't feel the need to continually write those reports. They take a long time to write, and actually I think we've addressed the problem, which is why we started doing that in the first place. So I just wanted to sort of give you a bit of information as to why, whenever Cabinet is sort of saying, have we got anything from scrutiny? And there's nothing. It's not that scrutiny's not doing a lot of work. It's just that that is reflective of a previous work in practice. And my suggestion to you would be perhaps to change that, because it doesn't reflect very positively on the contribution that scrutiny members are making.
So you want this committee to change the format?
I think you need to be mindful that when it says on Cabinet agendas, recommendations and reports from select committees, none, of the reasons why, and I think maybe here or somewhere else it needs to be discussed about changing that, because to an auditor or an external person it looks like scrutiny's not doing anything, when actually the number of scrutiny meetings has been steadily rising every year. And I think it's not fair on the contribution that members are making through these workshops that we've talked about, all the special meetings, pre-decision scrutinies, holding to account, but because it's not going to be captured in terms of a task and finish group report, I think it's not fair that it doesn't appear outwardly that you're actually doing a lot.
So perhaps we could put this on the next meeting, the 5th of February, for discussion, and I'd like to invite you back for that meeting. Right. There's no more on number 11. Number 12 is Members' Diary 218-219. There has been a lot of talk about this, and in the I'll put it this way: the older members then have got the diaries and the inserts from 5 years previous, and there's some of the members are no longer there, and obviously there's no update on the new members in there. So members are asking, not all, I will say, but a lot of them are asking if we can refer back to what we used to have, that all the different members are in there with it, telephone numbers, mobile numbers, and addresses. So it's because a lot, I got mine, I always carry mine, it's in my pocket, it's easier if I'm out on the road, I can refer to it, same as other people, and they're asking if that could be continued.
I know Alison and Rachel have already done it. So
They have, have they?
I'm not sure where it is at the printing stage yet, but we'll get it done.
Right, thank you. Right, the date, confirm the date and time of the next meeting, which is the 5th of February at 2 o'clock. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, just before you close the meeting, just as a heads up, because Nicola and I were just in pre-council, we've got 2 council meetings coming up now over the next couple of months, over February and March. One is a special meeting, 16th of February, and one is the meeting which has been moved once from the 1st of March to the 8th of March, which is going back to the 1st of March, which is going to be on the budget. Now, as you'll recall, I think based on recommendation of Democratic Services Committee and then subsequently a decision of full council, a decision was made to stagger the start times of the next cohort of council meetings. For the budget meeting on the 1st of March, if we follow that sequence, that meeting should start at 5 o'clock. And just as a heads up, I mean, we were just discussing it in pre-council, and it will have to be a decision of full council, and I believe the chairman is going to raise it on Thursday. But if your budget meeting starts at 5 o'clock, and bearing in mind that's a very long agenda, it's very detailed, it's very involved, I don't know if I fancy your chances of getting out at a reasonable hour. So, you know, just be aware you may be asked on Thursday if it is okay to move the meeting time so it starts earlier, so you've got proper time to consider the budget without feeling that things are getting quite late for you to be getting home. So just to forewarn you on that one.
I think in the light of what you said, you know, starting at 5 o'clock and such a crucial meeting with so much detailed information to take, with the best will in the world, elected members and officers will have been in, I assume, in work that day. You know, if you start at 5 and we're still running at 9 or past that, yes, you know, apart from the safety of officers and elected members getting home, but apart from that, in reality, when you get into a long meeting like that, and at that particular time of the day when people's energy levels are dipping in reality, then it's not the best for the outcomes. And I say I would feel some concern if we start at 5 o'clock for a budget meeting, which is bound to be long, bound to be contentious. With the best will in the world, it probably, you know, in my humble opinion, we should start at least at 2 o'clock. And to allow for a break at some point, if the meeting is particularly long. So I think that is a very important starting time issue.
If I can come in here, I did give the leader a heads up on this after the last council meeting. I said, you realise the budget meeting is falling in line with the 5 o'clock start. And he said, no, and I said, yes, it is. And I said, you want to relook at that? And he said he was going to, so obviously it's been discussed. Today, do you say, Kelly?
Yes.
Right. So, would we put a recommendation from this, or can we do that?
I mean, it's, you know, as a committee, you're perfectly entitled to put forward a response, but the chairman is going to raise it.
Oh, right.
Council on the agenda, I think, on Thursday.
Right, that's fine. So we leave it to the chairperson. Right, as I say, the next meeting is on the 5th of February at 2 o'clock, and I know, Matthew, you won't be here, so there's an apology from Matthew. And hopefully we'll have a few more here to go through the programme. Will our cabinet member be here?
Yes, Councillor Jones on holiday at the moment.
Oh, yes. Right.
Yes,
And-
I've got to say something.
Yeah, and what about our friend Matthew?
Yes, that back in.
I want to see. Right. Can I end the meeting, and hopefully you have a safe journey home.